I'm Pastor John Baird, and I want to welcome you to the Way the Word Ministries television ministry. I'm so honored to be here with each and every one of you sharing God's Word, and we are still in our study of the book of John. This is message number 39 in our study, and today we're going to be in John chapter 9, the first 5 verses. One of my favorite verses in all the Bible just happens to be one of the verses that we're going to be looking at today, and that's verse 4 from John chapter 9, where Jesus says, "We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work." And when you hear Jesus' words right there where he says, night is coming, what does that make you think of? For me, it makes me think of another phrase that Jesus used. It was in Matthew chapter 16, verse 3, where Jesus said, "You know how to interpret the weather by what you see in the sky, but you can't interpret the signs of the times." And in that verse, Jesus was telling everyone within the sound of his voice back there in the first century that they were blind to his coming. They couldn't read the signs of the times. They were oblivious as to who Jesus was. And today I'm recording this message in November of 2023, and I can tell you this much: the signs of the times here in our world today are letting us know in no uncertain terms that for sure night is coming. And the darkness that Jesus is referring to there in John chapter 9, verse 4, well, it's absolutely on the horizon in our world today. And some people would call that a negative message, but the truth is, it's an absolutely positive message because it's a message about the urgency of the here and now. Now, the last time that we were together, I told you we were going to be devoting 4 messages to John chapter 9, and that all of those messages were going to surround the miracle that we looked at the last time we were together. And that's the miracle where Jesus picked some dirt up off the ground, spit into it, rubbed it all together and made some mud, and then put that mud on the eyes of a man born blind. After Jesus did that, he told that man to go from the Temple Mount down to the pool of Siloam and wash that mud off of his eyes, and the man did what Jesus said to do, and after he did all that, he could see. And so with all of that as our foundation, let's jump into our verses for today now and see what's going on. John chapter 9, the first 5 verses. As Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." For most of human history, we didn't have electricity, and so people had to work during the daylight hours. When nighttime came, everybody had to quit working. The farmer, he had to take his plow horses and put them back in the barn. The carpenter, he had to set his tools on his workbench and go on home. Why? Because night had come when no one could work. Now, we're at a time and place in our study of John's gospel where Jesus is approaching the cross. And what we see is that Jesus had this sense of urgency as he approached the cross. The healing of the man born blind happened on a Sabbath day, and the Jewish religious leaders, they had already decided that they were going to use that to persecute Jesus. They were going to say, hey, Jesus, he broke the Sabbath law. But again, Jesus had an urgency about him, and so he seized the opportunity to heal this man born blind. And that's what this message today is all about. It's all about seizing the opportunity. And if you look at the word opportunity itself, what you'll notice is that in the middle of the word opportunity, you see another word, the word port. And this word opportunity, it comes from back in the days when all ships were sailing ships, before they were powered by steam or motors. And what would happen back in those days was a ship would be sailing along and they'd see a harbor that they wanted to enter. And so they'd get as close to the harbor as they could, and then they'd take down their sail and they'd weigh the anchor. And the reason they did that was they had to make sure that the tide and the wind was just right to carry them into that harbor. Sometimes they'd have to sit out there for a really long time. But when they knew that the tide and the wind was precisely right, well, that's when they'd lift that sail back up and they'd lift up that anchor and they'd go on ahead and they'd sail into the harbor. And so our English word opportunity comes from the Latin phrase ob portum veniens, which means coming toward a port. It refers to a favorable wind blowing ships into a harbor. So when an opportunity presents itself to you, think of it as something that a good wind blew your way. There are times in our lives where we ought to do something, because if we don't do them at that time, we're going to miss the opportunity. An ancient philosopher once said, there are three things you can't recover: a spent arrow, a spoken word, and a lost opportunity. John Greenleaf Whittier wrote these words: of all the sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these: it might have been. In his play of Julius Caesar, Shakespeare had Brutus say this: there is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune, but if omitted, all ventures are lost. Here's a true story about a missed opportunity. Some decades back, there was a man named Walter, and he decided he wanted to build a park, a family fun kind of a park. And so he bought this remote piece of property. He spent every cent that he had on it. And then he called his friend Art and took him out there to show him the property. And he said to Art, he said, when I build my family fun park out here, all this surrounding area around my property is going to end up being filled with hotels and motels and restaurants. And he said, Art, you ought to buy it. Well, Art looked around at all the land and he thought, this is just a pipe dream. People aren't going to drive 10 or 20 miles out of the city just to visit a park. I don't care how fun it is. And so he told Walter, he said, oh, I don't know, Walter, money's kind of tight right now. Perhaps I'll look at this investment later. And Walter told him, Art, later on it's going to be too late. And so Art Linkletter, he turned down that offer from none other than Walt Disney. Art Linkletter would later say that not buying that land surrounding Disneyland was the greatest financial regret of his life. But the truth is, we've all missed opportunities. And so today, in this message, I want to talk about 4 things we should do now, because the night is coming and we may lose the opportunity. Number 1, don't miss the opportunity to spend time alone with the Lord. Jesus' earthly ministry was just 3 years long, and yet Mark tells us in his gospel, in Mark chapter 1, verse 35, that very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. That means that even though Jesus was doing the greatest act in history, the most stellar event in the history of anything, anywhere, redeeming lost humanity, he still took the time, he still seized the opportunity to get alone with his Father, God the Father, and commune with him in prayer. Martin Luther, the great 16th century reformer, said this: I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. Yeah, Martin Luther, he knew that no matter how busy his day looked, no matter how much was on his plate, he needed to get alone with God the Father before he started the day. Otherwise, no matter what he did, well, it simply wasn't going to amount to much. In the book of Philippians chapter 4 verses 6 and 7, the Apostle Paul tells us, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." So what about you? Do you have a lot on your plate today? Let me give you a little piece of advice. Take it to God first. He'll tell you where you're right. He'll tell you where you're wrong. And if you're willing to listen to Him, He'll take you to that place of peace. Every day that we don't get alone with God in prayer, that day is gone forever. We'll never know how many blessings we forfeited by our lack of prayer. Like the song says, "Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear, all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer." Listen, it's great to be about God's business, but don't be so busy serving the Lord that you don't set aside time every day to seek the Lord in prayer and in His Word. One of my most favorite encounters of Jesus is found in the book of Luke chapter 10. And this is where Jesus is visiting the home of Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. Well, Jesus comes in the house, and Martha, she goes out in the kitchen and she starts preparing food and doing all kind of work because Jesus has stopped by to visit. But not Mary. She's down on her knees just listening to everything Jesus says. She's hanging on to every word that Jesus is speaking. And so Martha is showing us a great example of what it is to work for the Lord. But Mary shows us a great example of what it is to worship the Lord. You can almost picture in your mind Martha coming into the doorway of the kitchen with her hands on her hips, and she looks at Mary down there at Jesus' feet, and she says, "Mary, get out here in the kitchen and help me." And then you can see Mary just sort of wave Martha off because she's listening to the Lord. And Martha, she gets all frustrated and she protests. She complains to Jesus. And she said, "Jesus, tell my sister Mary to get out here in the kitchen and help me." Now, listen to Jesus's words back to Martha. Listen carefully and see if these words just might apply to your life. And let me warn you ahead of time, Jesus is going to sound a little bit here like a first century episode of the Brady Bunch. The book of Luke chapter 10 verses 41 and 42. "Martha, Martha, Martha," Jesus said, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." No matter how busy you might think your schedule is, don't miss that one thing. And that one thing is actually point number one today. Don't miss the opportunity to spend time alone with God. Why? Because night is coming when no one can work. And point number two, don't miss the opportunity to express your love to others. Let's go back to the house of Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha again. This time it's in John chapter 12, and they're having a big celebration dinner at Lazarus's house. And what are they celebrating? Well, they're celebrating the fact that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Martha is working again, and Mary is once more at the feet of Jesus. Only this time, Mary takes a pound of pure nard, a very expensive perfume, and she uses it to anoint the feet of Jesus. And then she wipes Jesus' feet with her long hair. And we're told that the fragrance of that perfume filled the room. And then in John chapter 12, verse 5, we're told Judas complained about it and said, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." And we learn in the very next verse that Judas's motives, as always, were selfish. He didn't really care about the poor. Look what it says in verse 6 of John chapter 12. "Judas did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it." And in the next two verses, verses 7 and 8 of John chapter 12, Jesus replies to Judas. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." There were many times when Jesus told his disciples, not just the 12 that made up his inner circle, but all those disciples that were following him, that he was going to go up to Jerusalem, he was going to be crucified, he would die, and 3 days later he would rise again. But Mary, Lazarus' sister, she seems to be the only one who got it. She knew that Jesus wasn't always going to be around, and so she seized the opportunity when it presented itself. She not only told Jesus she loved him, she showed Jesus she loved him, because real love is always accompanied by action. Look what the Apostle John said in 1 John chapter 3, verse 18. "Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." Why do we want to do that? Because the night is coming when no one can work. One day there's going to come a time where the opportunity won't be there anymore for us to tell someone we love them or to show someone that we love them. Is there a family member or a friend that you need to call or see today? Is there someone out there that you need to get in touch with and say, "Hey, I just couldn't let this day pass without telling you that I love you"? Do it now, because the opportunity won't always be there. On December the 22nd, 2005, Tony Dungy, the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, got the phone call that every parent dreads. Yeah, his son James, only 18 years old, had committed suicide. No matter who you are, you're never ready for something like that. Suicide, it leaves an indelible mark on those who are left behind. It leaves a deep pain that never really goes away. How do you respond to something like that? What do you say when something like that happens in your life? Well, for Tony Dungy, he used his strong faith in God to get through, and he was actually able to speak at his son's celebration of life, and he used that opportunity. He seized the opportunity to give some advice to other parents. Here's what he said: "Hug your kids every chance you get. Tell them you love them every chance you get. You don't know when it's going to be the last time." There are some things that haven't been said that some of us need to say to other people that we love, because we've been out of their lives for a long time. Don't let the opportunity pass. Call them right now. Tell them right now, "Hey, I love you. I appreciate you." Why? Because the night is coming when no one can work. Number 2, don't miss the opportunity to express your love to others. And number 3, don't miss the opportunity to share your faith with lost people. I think sometimes we forget that a person who hasn't placed their faith in Jesus is spiritually lost. And we refer to them in real nice terms, right? We call them unbelievers and unchurched. In religious surveys, they're usually referred to as nuns, and the reason they're called nuns is because they always check the box marked none when asked about their religious affiliation. But again, I want to remind you that a person who hasn't received Jesus is spiritually lost, and they are facing eternity separated from God in a place called hell. And actually, it was Jesus who first coined the phrase lost in the book of Luke chapter 19, verse 10, when he said, "For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost." I believe that everyone watching and listening to me right now, everyone within the sound of my voice, and that means me, myself, that includes me too, all of us, we all know someone who's lost. And God, He gives us certain opportunities to share the gospel with them. But how many times do we miss that opportunity? And the truth is, that opportunity will never come back exactly like that again. And that's why we should have that same sense of urgency that we see that Jesus had in our verses. Because again, Jesus told us that night is coming when no one can work. We have to seize every opportunity to share our faith, because the enemy, he's absolutely going to seize every opportunity he can to prevent us from sharing our faith. There was this guy named Charles, and he would at times share a story about how he missed an opportunity to share the gospel with one of his friends. It happened to him when he was in college. He met this other guy. They were in a few classes together, and they started hanging out together, and they used to like to play tennis together. And as Charles got to know this guy, he realized this guy wasn't a Christian, that this guy wasn't a follower of Jesus. And as soon as he realized that, God started to burden Charles's heart for this other guy. And so Charles said, you know what? I'm going to share the gospel with that guy. And so he decided what he'd do is he'd invite his friend to play tennis. And then after they were done playing tennis, he would share the gospel with this guy. Well, they met over at the tennis court and they started to play tennis. And Charles, he was more than just a little bit competitive. He was very competitive. And the enemy, he started to play on Charles's weakness of being competitive. And what ended up happening was Charles, he got more into the tennis match than he did for the real reason why he came. And at one point, these two guys, they were volleying up to the net. They got really close to the net. And when the point was over, Charles, he bent over to pick up the tennis ball, and the pocket New Testament that he had in his top pocket that he brought to share the gospel with his friend, it fell out on the ground. And his friend said, hey, Charlie, what's that? And Charles, he picked it up and put it back in his pocket and said, it's nothing. We'll talk about it later. Let's get back to the tennis match. Well, Charles, he ended up losing that tennis match, and he was very upset with himself. And so when it was over, he just walked away, and he thought, I'll just tell him about Jesus some other time. Yeah, and you can imagine Charles's horror when he got to class the next morning and found out that his friend had been killed the night before in a terrible car wreck. Now, Charles, he ended up becoming a preacher, and he would share that story sometimes when he was preaching, and he would always add at the end that he never quite got over that missed opportunity. And I think all of us as followers of Jesus can relate to Charles, because all of us at one time or another have missed an opportunity to share the gospel, all because we thought, I'll have another opportunity again later. Well, let me tell you right now, opportunities, they really do come and go. But like Jesus said, night is coming when no one can work. Point number 3, don't miss the opportunity to share the gospel with lost people. And I was going to end this message right here. I had a little ending that I wrote for it right here. But I decided to add a fourth point, a fourth should do. And this is for all the people that might be watching who haven't received Jesus yet. And if you're watching and you are a follower of Jesus, well, when this message is over, when you're done watching it, if you know someone who isn't saved, someone who hasn't received Jesus, and you're watching on social media, YouTube or Facebook, copy the link and send it to that lost person. Ask them to watch it. Ask them to consider watching it, and let them know that you'll discuss it with them when everything is over. And so point number 4, should do number 4. If you haven't already, well then seize the opportunity to follow Jesus now. When Jesus called the disciples to follow him, he didn't hang around and wait for their answer. He found Andrew and then Peter and then James and John. They were all fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. And then Jesus, he kept on walking. Those guys, they had to act in the moment. They had to seize the opportunity, or the opportunity was going to be gone. After that, Jesus found Matthew. He was a tax collector. And Jesus said, hey, Matthew, follow me. And Matthew, he had to get up and leave his tax records. He had to seize the opportunity, or the opportunity was going to pass him by. And Jesus, he kept on walking and getting more disciples until finally he was walking carrying a cross, and he had to carry that cross all the way up Calvary Hill. And even though he had a little bit of help doing that from Simon of Cyrene, when he got up on that hill, they nailed him to that cross and they crucified him there, and he died. And 3 days later, he rose again. And you know what he did after that? he kept on walking. He walked this earth for 40 days for over 500 people to see, and then he ascended back to heaven. But before he left, he told all of his followers, and that means all of us, to do a little walking too. He said, hey, walk to the ends of the earth if you have to, telling people to follow him. And I'm telling you right now, if you're watching and listening to me today and you haven't received Jesus yet, Jesus is telling you, hey, follow me. And I know that's what he's telling you because he's using me to do it. So how are you going to respond? You might be thinking, well, I got plenty of time to do that later. Let me remind you about what Jesus said. The night is coming when no one can work. You and I, we are living in the day of God's grace, but it's not going to last forever. If you haven't received Jesus yet, you need to seize the opportunity to do that right now. And maybe you don't understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about God's day of grace or God's time of grace. Let me explain it to you this way. Most insurance companies have what they call a grace period. Yeah, if you don't pay your premium, the insurance company, they're going to extend your coverage for a little while, hoping you're going to pay that a premium. But sooner or later, if you don't pay the premium, they're going to cancel your insurance policy. They're going to cancel your coverage. Well, God has a grace period too. And we're in it today. We are living in the age of grace, the age of God's grace. Salvation is absolutely free, but there's a limit to God's grace period. You see, we're all facing a divine deadline of two deadlines. Number one, any of us at any second could die unexpectedly. It happens all the time. And that's the end of our grace period. And number two, Jesus could come suddenly and rapture the body of Christ. And that's the end of our grace period. Now, when I mention the rapture right there, I'm not talking about the second coming of Jesus. The rapture is when Jesus comes in the air and he lifts all of his faithful followers up out of here. And when he does that, he's taken us to a celebration that lasts 7 years. It's called the Wedding Feast of the Lamb. We're going to be there while this earth endures a 7-year tribulation. Now, people will be able to be saved during that 7-year tribulation, but the vast majority of them are going to be martyred. And so when either of those two things takes place, that's when a person's grace period runs out. They're either going to meet the undertaker or the upper taker. The choice is absolutely theirs. They can seize the opportunity to know God, or they can reject God. And that's why the perfect time to be saved, the perfect time to seize the opportunity is right now. Look what Paul said in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. As God's co-workers, we urge you not to receive God's grace in vain. For he says, in the time of my favor, I heard you, and in the day of salvation, I helped you. I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. That's why, again, the best day to be saved is today. Paul is saying it right there. Look with me now at the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, verse 6. This verse, it's both encouraging and scary at the same time. Check it out. The prophet Isaiah says, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. The encouraging part of that verse right there is, it's telling us the Lord is near and that the Lord can be found. The scary part of that verse right there is, it's telling us there's going to come a time when the Lord won't be near and he won't be able to be found. In other words, if you haven't already, that verse is telling us that there's an opportune time for you to be saved, for you to receive God and be saved, but you got to seize the opportunity. Otherwise, that opportunity is going to be gone. It's like a limited time offer. Yeah, you got to seize the opportunity while it's on the table. There's an imaginary story about a strategy meeting between Satan and 3 of his top demons, and they were discussing how to ruin the human race. And the first demon, he said to Satan, hey, I know, Satan, I know what we'll do. We'll tell him there's no God. And Satan, he thought about it for a minute, and he said, no, that won't work. All they got to do is look out there at the beauty of creation, and they'll know that there has to be a creator. They'll know know that God is real. And so the second demon said to Satan, hey, Satan, I got it, I know. We'll tell him there's no hell. And Satan thought about it for a moment, and then he said, no, with all the evil out there in the world, they'll know that there's just got to be a place called hell. And then the third demon spoke up, and the third demon said, wait, I got it. We'll tell him there's no hurry. And Satan thought about it, and he got a big grin on his face, and he said, that's it. Go gather up all the other fallen angels and tell them to go out there and start spreading the word. Tell them to tell every human being out there, there's no hurry, man. You got all the time in the world to receive Jesus. And that's been Satan's MO forever. He's a liar and a deceiver. Jesus said he doesn't have any power left except the power to lie and deceive. And he doesn't even have that power over us unless we let him. He whispers in our ears. His demons whisper in our ears some foul thing, and our flesh buys into the deceit. And maybe Satan is talking to you right now, and he's telling you, relax, don't listen to that hillbilly preacher. You got all the time in the world to receive Jesus. But let me tell you, salvation hesitation can lead to procrastination devastation, which can lead to eternal termination. So let me ask you, when were you the closest to death in your life? And some of you might be thinking, well, I guess it was when I had that surgery, or when I had that car wreck, or maybe when I had that heart attack. But no, you survived all those things. God brought you through all those things. The closest that you've ever been to death is today. It's right now. And that's why I'm imploring you, please seize the opportunity to receive Jesus, and seize that opportunity right now, because Jesus has been telling us all through this message, night is coming when no one can work. Jesus' earthly ministry, it was only 3 years long, and that's why he had a sense of urgency about everything he did. And that's why he told us, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. All of us, we need to have that same sense of urgency that Jesus did, not just about our own lives, but about the lives of everyone else out there. Don't miss another opportunity to spend time alone with God. Don't miss another opportunity to tell someone that you love them. Don't miss another opportunity to share your faith with someone who's not saved. And if you don't know Jesus, if you haven't received Jesus yet, please don't miss this opportunity today to receive Jesus into your heart. All of my information, my name, my phone number, my email address, it's all been down here at the bottom of the screen during this whole message. Please feel free to call me, to text me, to shoot me off an email, and I'll be glad to talk with you about the whole thing. But please seize this opportunity to receive Jesus into your life, because the one true, tried, and triune God, he was willing to sacrifice himself to bring you that opportunity. People, keep fighting the good fight, because night is coming when no one can work. Until the next time you and I meet here on the Way the Word Ministries television ministry, may God bless you, may God keep you, and may God grant each and every one of you the desires of your heart, all in Jesus' mighty name. Until then, I'll see you later, everybody.